Warm greetings, Code Monkeys. This is just a quick little video intro to explain what's going on here if for some reason you aren't already aware of it. This is the first episode of the We Talk Stuff podcast. It is also available currently on SoundCloud and possibly on iTunes. I don't know. The whole iTunes thing is a little on the complicated side, but we're working on that. This is the only episode that we are going to be releasing on YouTube. The rest of them will be released only on SoundCloud and again on iTunes once I get that figured out. Like I said, it's complicated. So I hope you guys are looking forward to this. Hope that you enjoy it. Matt and I had a lot of fun recording it, and we're hoping that you guys have a lot of fun listening to it. So let us know what you thought of it. Enjoy. Warm greetings, friends, neighbors, and code monkeys, and welcome to We Talk Stuff, the podcast in which two guys of extremely minor internet quasi-relevance discuss whatever catches our and your fancy. I'm Jesse Coder.
And I'm Matt Guyan.
Indeed you are. How's it going, Matt?
It's going pretty well. Actually, my wife and I just recently, for our apartment, acquired 2 new pieces of furniture in the past week. One of which was a bookshelf, which we badly needed because we still had most of our books in boxes. So we've been doing that and actually starting to feel like we're finally moving into this apartment where we're living right now after about 8 months of living here, because that's just the way we are. But no, things are going pretty well. How are things going with you?
Fine. I just recently got back from a trip to Boston. There'll be some video footage of that on my YouTube channel eventually. Mm-hmm. I was chaperoning is a better term.
Yes.
A church group down there. The Unitarian Universalist faith kind of has its roots in Boston. That was where the Unitarians and the Universalists first kind of came together and became some sort of a unified people. They used to be two separate faiths. So we have a group of 8th graders. It's called Affirmation in Our Faith. I believe the Catholic Church calls it Confirmation.
Protestants too.
Protestant. Yeah, yeah. I don't know all the ins and outs of all the different.
That's
Jesus worshiping people.
Preacher's kid. I know this stuff.
Right. No, there's a lot of different religions that worship Jesus. It's hard for me to keep track of the ins and outs of each one. He was a popular guy.
Yeah, very, very, very popular. Yeah, I've been kind of interested in learning more about actually a Unitarian Universalist. I know that my mom's actually, now that she's retired, my mom has actually taken some, I don't think you call it preaching, but she's done some messages at a nearby Unitarian Universalist church. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're called sermons. Our preachers are called reverends.
Okay, all right.
So it's not terribly
not
different.
Not too different. Okay.
Yeah. The Unitarian Universalist faith actually does have its roots in Christianity. That was kind of where it evolved from. But I can talk a lot about that. Hey, maybe on the next podcast or something.
We should be like writing down ideas for episodes as we're doing this.
Yeah. So that was cool. That's a lot of fun to do. Great group of kids. We'll be taking my godson Brighton down to the Wizarding World of Harry Potter and New Orleans later this month. He is undoubtedly much more excited about the former because the former has much more roller coasters in it.
Probably.
And I'd be lying if I said I didn't share that enthusiasm. I mean, New Orleans sounds nice, but Harry Potter.
Harry Potter. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. But anyway, we are here to talk about 2 things. Later in the podcast, we're going to be talking a bit about Hamilton. We're going to start by talking about Twisted, the Untold Story of a Royal Vizier. The sort of a general format of what we're doing here is that our kind of goal is to be talking about 2 things each month. One thing that I am familiar with and you're not, and one thing vice versa.
Right.
And we kind of assign each other things in that regard. We'll try to make them at least somewhat related. So it's musical theater again for this time. But yeah, so Twisted. A little bit of background for those of you who might not know what Twisted is. It's best described as Wicked, but about Jafar from Aladdin, and it's by a theater group called Team Starkid, or Starkid Productions, as they are now more commonly known. They sort of rose to prominence through mostly through the Harry Potter musical series, which is where Darren Criss got his start. If any of you guys are familiar with him, it's a Chicago-based musical theater company. It was founded in 2009 at the University of Michigan. But yeah, it's a pretty cool little group if you guys ever get the chance to check them out. Yeah, what did you think of Twisted, Matt?
I thoroughly enjoyed it. I grew up with Aladdin. Aladdin is actually it's the first Disney movie I specifically remember seeing in theaters. I was like 6 or 7 when it came out, and I remember going to the theater to see it, and just absolutely loved it. I thought it was hilarious, obviously, and I grew up. It was one of those movies that I just watched over and over and over again as a kid, to the point where my parents got sick of it. But yeah, so to watch this show, which kind of turns all of that on its head. I know I'm not going to be able to watch Aladdin in the same way again, which I think is a pretty common sentiment for people who watch this. But to watch this show and to see all the little references, but then also to hear a surprisingly compelling story. Mm-hmm. The only exposure I've had with Starkid Productions is the Harry Potter musical. That's the only thing of theirs I've actually watched all the way through, and I really enjoyed that. And I downloaded the soundtrack and listened to that a lot. But it is very kind of sketch comedy. Mm-hmm. Like it's very silly. It's obviously something that they weren't taking too terribly seriously. They were just having a good time doing it, which is fun in its own way. And then so I was surprised that there is some of that silliness in Twisted.
Plenty.
But I was there's quite a bit actually. But I was surprised at how they actually put together a really compelling and in a lot of ways a really professional looking story, mm-hmm. With interesting characters and a really interesting storyline. And they did. You can tell they took it a little bit more seriously. They were still having a good time doing it, but they did mm-hmm. take it a little bit more seriously and tried to put together a more compelling and in a lot of ways a darker story than they did with Harry Potter musical.
Yeah. I can't remember who said this. I heard it at some point online, and I can't remember the source, but it is said that for a comedy to be truly successful, there has to come a point where it's not funny anymore. There has to come a point where the joke is over. Mm-hmm. I was hearing it said, particularly in reference to The Princess Bride, with the whole story arc of Inigo Montoya. Mm-hmm. There's in order for comedy to truly work, you do have to be really invested, and mm-hmm. I think this musical does a really good job of that. And what I really appreciate, I think, most about it is it's a truly proper work of parody.
Yes, absolutely.
Good parody is a little hard to find nowadays. It's certainly out there. God knows Weird Al is still doing great things, but there's a lot of good satire that we have nowadays, and the line between parody and satire has always been a little bit of a blurry one. But to me, the essential difference is that when it comes to satire, it's often done in an attempt to ridicule or skewer something. When you're talking about parody, in order for it to work, you really, really have to love the thing that you're parodying.
Absolutely.
That is essential to good parody, and it is clear that the people who made Twisted really, really love Aladdin, really love Disney, really love Pixar, but at the same time are very, very keenly aware that there's a lot of problems mm-hmm. with not just Aladdin, but with Disney in general. And it really has that fantastic balance of being able to really love something while still acknowledging its flaws. And I think that's something that's really important to be able to do, especially in today's day and age, where I feel like there's a lot of tendency to really vehemently try to defend every single aspect of something that you like, because it can sometimes feel like if somebody doesn't like a thing that you like, it can sometimes feel like an attack on yourself personally. Yeah. And I think that a lot of the internet needs to understand that you can still love something whilst also acknowledging its flaws. And Twisted does that extremely, extremely well.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And they did that really well with Harry Potter as well, with the Harry Potter musical. As silly as it is still a good example, I think, of parody, because they do point out a lot of the problems and a lot of the flaws in the Harry Potter series. But it's really, really obvious that they love the Harry Potter series.
Oh yeah.
And I definitely got the same sense with this. And I kind of felt like, like everything you read about this says it's parody of Aladdin. I almost feel like it's not so much a parody of Aladdin as it is a parody of the Disney Renaissance formula that started with Little Mermaid and continued with Beauty and the Beast, and then Aladdin, and the further Disney films after that really capitalized on. Yeah. Where, it's, follow your dreams and all this sort of thing. And they really do a great job of kind of pointing out the problem with that, and the problem that it had with that particular generation of kids who grew up with the Disney Renaissance, pointing that out while also making it incredibly funny. Like we can look at it and laugh about it. It's like, yeah, that is kind of a thing. But then also, later be thinking, that Disney is very problematic in a lot of ways. And they really pointed out some of those problems really, really well.
But at the same time, it's still okay to, Disney's done a lot of really good things too, and they've made a lot of really good films, and it's it's not, it's not just one thing or the other thing. Both of these, you can have a lot of problems and still be very good at what you do,
and it's okay to like something even if it does have a lot of problems as well. Like I think that really comes through as well. We recognize that Disney has issues, but we still like Disney. We still like the Disney movies. We still enjoy watching them, and they were still a big part of our childhood. Yeah,
it's kind of. I think it's really very important to kind of examine one's own nostalgia. I'm obviously, I grew up, at the time that I did, and I was, a big Disney kid. I was maybe a little bit more of a Pixar kid than a Disney kid, maybe a little bit. I think the first, you mentioned Aladdin was the first one you can recall seeing in theaters. I know that it was not the first one I saw in theaters, but the one I can remember first was The Lion King. That's the one I first remember seeing. If we're talking about Disney Pixar, the first one I actually remember seeing, it was, I can't remember which, it was either The Lion King or Toy Story. But those, these are the kinds of things I grew up on, and, they have a really special place in my heart, but there's problems with them, and it's okay, and in fact, I would say necessary to acknowledge and understand those problems, because the media that we consume will always have an effect on us. And it's important to acknowledge the effects that these things have on us and to be conscious of them, just to not be a passive consumer, if that makes sense. And I think that is, really a lot of what this musical is about, is just almost, like the people who run Team Star Kid kind of almost working their way through this process of, re-examining the things that they loved and figuring out, okay, this is a problem here, this is a problem here, but here's what I really like about it, and here's, it touched our hearts, and it can still touch our hearts, but, here's the problems. It's really good in that regard, just thematically. But also, apart from all that, it's just a really well put together musical.
Yeah.
Like you were saying, it does a really, really good job of putting together a very compelling story. I think this musical succeeds arguably much better on its own terms than a Harry Potter musical series did.
Definitely, yeah.
I have not seen all of Team Star Kids stuff, but of the stuff that I've seen, which is this and a Harry Potter musical, Twisted is my favorite thing that they've done. I think it's really, really fantastic. I think it's really successful. It's very funny. The acting is really great, particularly I can't remember the name of the actor, but the guy who plays Jafar in this is really, really fantastic.
He is.
Hell of a singer, hell of an actor.
Dylan Saunders is his name.
Dylan Saunders, yeah. He is amazing. He has that very precious talent of being able to shift very quickly and very seamlessly between comedic acting and dramatic acting. That is hard to pull off. And I really, really respect the hell out of him for it. But really, everyone in this is very, very good. And the music in particular, I think, is really, really great. A lot of it, will obviously references other Disney films, not just Aladdin. The beginning song is kind of a pastiche of what is the song called? The opening song to Beauty and the Beast.
Bonjour.
I think it's just Bonjour. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, the music is just fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I thought the music was fantastic in Harry Potter musical as well. And the A.J. Holmes, interesting. I actually encountered A.J. Holmes before Harry Potter musical was even a thing. Because I found him purely by chance. He had put together, I think when he was still in high school, he put together a production of Jason Robert Brown's Songs for a New World. Which he then performed in and was acted as musical director for his school, and they filmed it and put it up on YouTube, and so I watched it. That's been my exposure to that particular musical. But incredibly talented musician, and then I discovered Harry Potter musical and found out that he was behind the music. But yeah, he's very, very talented, and he writes music very, very well. And particularly, I think he does a good job of incorporating familiar musical elements. He did that with Harry Potter musical, and he did that with Twisted as well, incorporating familiar musical elements into the music.
Another thing that I really like about the music is the lyrics in particular are really, really good in this song. In this music. It does a very good job of creating that really good sense of flow from comedy to serious that is just so important to the heart of this show and what it's trying to do. There are some lines that are just do a really effective job of just really cutting to the point of what they think is problematic about these. As the one that sticks out of my mind at the moment is in the opening song, which I think is just called "Fuck You, Jafar." Is he? What is the line? One of the that's where they first introduced this motif of how Jafar is kind of the only person in this kingdom that's got really any sense, and everyone else is just kind of obsessed with dreams and all that kind of thing. And there's this line that goes, "If you're good and you're attractive, no need to be proactive. Good things will just happen to you." Yeah. That's and then I'm not coming up with any examples at the moment of how how it just kind of flows from one thing into the other. Actually, there's this whole scene which is a flashback to kind of the events of Jafar's life that led him to this point. It goes, it comes off the heels of this very, sort of over the top goofy scene. And then immediately just kind of flows into this flashback, and the flashback itself starts off a little on the silly side, and then it progressively gets darker and darker, and to this point where it's really, really tragic. I'm not going to talk specifically about what it is, although really if you're listening to a podcast about Twisted and Hamilton, you should have listened to these things
before.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, yeah, I just think it's really fantastic, and I really, really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I think they do strike a really good balance between comedy and tragedy, and just drama in general. Like this is one of those shows where I was watching it. 1 minute I was laughing, the next minute I was choking up at something that happened, and it's, I was and like I said at the beginning, I was surprised at just how effective this, emotionally effective this musical was, for as silly as it is.
Yeah.
They really do make you feel something, and they really do. They manage to. They almost managed to make fun of the Disney formula, but also in a weird sort of way adhere to the Disney formula. Because it does, without giving too much away, it does basically have a happy ending, and it does kind of resolve itself in the way that a lot of Disney movies and Disney stories do.
It feels earned, though.
It does. It doesn't feel like a Deus Ex Machina or anything like that. Like, it feels like they really did go through what they needed to go through.
Yeah, there is a bit of a Deus Ex Machina towards the end, but it's
a bit, but
there's this thing that I see, in some comedic works. I call it the comedic Deus Ex Machina, where the solution kind of falls out of thin air, and but it's meant to kind of be making fun of the Deus Ex Machina, and I think you have to do a lot of work to earn the comedic Deus Ex Machina. I remember I mentioned that way back when we were talking about Epic Movie.
Yeah,
that's a really good example of very, very bad parody.
Very poor parody.
which really does not earn that sort of comedic Deus Ex Machina. But I think the important distinction is, while there are elements of the plot that get resolved with the comedic Deus Ex Machina, that is not the same is not true for the emotional core of the story.
Yeah.
The emotional core of the story is built up in a very good way and resolves itself in an extremely satisfying and heartfelt way. And that's a big part of why it kind of earns the right to end the way it does, I feel.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's about all I can think of to say about it. But yeah, if any of you who are listening to this have not seen Twisted, the whole thing is available on YouTube. Team StarKid is really good at making sure that they have a filmed version of their stage productions available online. So you can watch pretty much anything that they do in that regard. But yeah, I would really, really highly recommend this particular musical, especially if you're a person who grew up with Disney. It's, I think, not just a really good musical, but a really important musical for people who love Disney to see.
All right. Well, with that, I think we are going to transition into our second topic, which is the Broadway musical phenomenon and now earner of a record-breaking 16 Tony nominations, Hamilton, the musical. For those of you who are not aware of what Hamilton is, and I think most people who are tuning in are fully aware of what Hamilton is, but just in case you came here primarily for Twisted, Hamilton is a hip-hop musical about the life of Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton. And when you say it out loud, it sounds completely ridiculous.
Yes.
I distinctly remember when I first started getting into Hamilton, I was listening to the soundtrack a lot, and one of my co-workers, just making conversation, because I was still relatively new at the time, just making conversation, asked me, what sort of music do you like to listen to? And I immediately said, well, right now I'm really into this hip-hop musical about Alexander Hamilton. And he did not ask me about my musical preferences after that. But somehow this really bizarrely odd juxtaposition of three very, very different things works. Works incredibly effectively, and it has become incredibly popular. I actually was doing a little bit of Wikipedia research before this podcast, and I discovered that the cast recording was number one hip hop album and number one original cast recording album for a time. So the fact that they really did juxtapose those elements together very well. So I gave you a couple of different options. I gave you the option of listening to the entire cast recording, which is available on YouTube. And then if you didn't want to make like the 3-hour time commitment that requires, I gave you a list of songs. So which one did you actually end up doing?
I ended up listening to the entire thing.
Good.
I had I had very little exposure to Hamilton before coming into this. Mainly, I was sort of dimly aware of it through my Tumblr, and from what I understood from Tumblr, I knew it was like a full blown thing, like capital T thing, but I had just not bothered to look it up because I don't know, I was just doing other things. So I came into this pretty blind, and yeah, I did end up listening to the entire thing. I actually found an alternate website called genius.com, which was really great.
I was going to mention that, actually, yeah.
Yeah, it was really great to be able to listen to it on genius.com because it has the cast recording up there along with the lyrics, because some of this, this is a very lyrically dense musical, and some of it is said quite fast, so it helped me to be able to kind of follow along reading with the lyrics. And then also on the sidebar, there's like a little bit of there's like a few paragraphs on each song, like a little bit of background information either about the song itself or the historical period it's talking about, and sometimes it'll give you a little bit of information about what is kind of happening between the songs. But it's very, very it's a very good way, short of I think it's probably the best way to experience it, short of actually seeing the stage production. And it should be noted that neither of us have seen the stage production, because we don't have gobs and gobs of money.
We don't have gobs of money, and the wait list to see this show is extensive.
Insane.
Like,
yes.
This is an incredibly popular show, and it's very, very difficult to get tickets without forking over like $300-400.
Yeah. So we should just note that at the beginning that you can only obviously it's a stage production and you can only glean so much about it without having actually seen the stage production. But from what I understand, it's there's not a whole lot of non-music dialogue in this thing.
There's not, no.
So it's easy to get a pretty full picture of everything pretty much without that.
Yeah, I know that there is one fairly pivotal scene, which is not in the cast recording, but they do put the transcript of it up on Genius.com, and basically they didn't put it on the cast recording first because it's not really a song, it's more of a scene, but also because Lin-Manuel Miranda, the creator, kind of said, we should leave something for the people who actually come to see the show.
Sure.
But you can still get most of the important aspects of the story just listening to the cast recording, and I love musicals like that are pretty much sung through, where you can just listen to the cast recording and pretty much get the whole story. A lot of my favorite musicals are like that because then listening to the album itself becomes an experience.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and I don't feel like I've missed a terrible amount. I mean, it's like I understand the story about as well as I could without having seen the stage production, and really all I feel like I'm missing is just a bit of nuance. But even from what I have experienced, this is extremely, extremely, extremely good, and it's just so different. Aside from just being really, really good at what it is, it's unlike any musical I've ever heard. And I'm sure that there are, hip-hop musicals out there.
Not many. The only other major one that I know of was also written by Lin-Manuel Miranda before this. It's called In the Heights. And it won the Tony Award for Best Musical in 2008. And I'm sure that there are others out there, but not nearly as prominent. It's still a relatively new thing.
Yeah, but it's just really... It's so different from anything else I've ever experienced in relation to a musical. I mean, there are sort of more traditional sort of musical numbers. It's really cool to read about all the different musical influences in the little sidebar on Genius.com, like just all these different little touches. Like I love how there are these, I believe, 3 letters from King George that appear throughout the musical, and they're done in sort of a like almost like a British pop style. Sort of reminiscent of the early Beatles. Which is a really cool and effective contrast between what's going on over there and what's going on in America. And it's just so phenomenal.
Well, and one of the things I kind of want to get into with this musical is just the fact that it is such a bizarre juxtaposition of 3 different things that you wouldn't think would belong together: musical theater, hip hop, and American history. But it works somehow. And one of the things that Lin-Manuel Miranda does really, really well is that every choice that he makes, every musical choice that he makes is very, very intentional.
Oh, yes.
Using popular music in musical theater is nothing new. It's how Andrew Lloyd Webber made his career, and it's all
yeah.
I don't care for Andrew Lloyd Webber.
We won't get into that.
We won't get into that at least
now.
Not in this podcast. I will say that Lin-Manuel Miranda does actually take a great deal of inspiration from Andrew Lloyd Webber, and particularly in the fact that the villain is narrating the story, which it's interesting. We tried to make these 2 topics, Twisted and Hamilton, similar by them both being musical theater, but they're actually very similar in other ways too. And one of them is that it's the story as told by the traditional villain in the story. So Aaron Burr is the one narrating a lot of this story. And one of the things that Lin-Manuel Miranda does really well is that he basically assigns each character a musical genre. And like each character has their own style of music that they adhere to. You talked about King George, and him being British pop, and I also think a little bit of kind of traditional musical theater. Like his songs sound the most like traditional musical theater, because he represents the establishment. He represents the all that, and then hip hop is used pretty extensively, but other musical genres are also used. Hamilton style is a very lyrically dense, a very wordy style of rapping that is a step above everybody else's. Like there's a lot of internal rhyme, there's a lot of really, really clever lyrical things happening. And actually the song My Shot, which is basically Alexander Hamilton's introduction into the story, he spent a year writing that, because he knew that was Alexander Hamilton's introduction into the show, essentially. And so he needed to illustrate just how much a step above everyone else Alexander Hamilton was. Like, we hear the other characters rapping and they're kind of doing, basic rhyming couplets, that sort of thing. And then here comes Alexander Hamilton, and he's, I'm past patiently waiting, I'm passionately smashing every expectation, every action's an act of creation, all that sort of thing. Just to show that he is way above everybody else. And then you've got Thomas Jefferson, who comes in Act 2, and his thought process with him was, Thomas Jefferson is a generation older than Alexander Hamilton, so I'm going to give him the previous generation of music, of popular music. So his is more of kind of a jazzy sort of funk, kind of that precursor to rap, when he sings his Act 2 song, What Did I Miss? And so every single genre choice is intentional, unlike, again, Andrew Lloyd Webber, who just basically uses pop music for the sake of using pop music. Lin-Manuel Miranda uses it very, very intentionally, and it helps us to learn a little bit more about these characters. And the question that naturally kind of occurs, I think, with some people when they hear about this musical is, why hip-hop? Why hip-hop music? Of all the popular genres he could have picked, why did he pick hip-hop? And this is going to get us into the potentially awkward situation where we got 2 white guys talking about hip hop music.
I will say that I know very little about hip hop, historically speaking. I've listened to a fair amount of it, but I don't have much in the way of really any kind of musical not knowledge, but education. You know, I really, the extent of my musical education was that I was in some choirs in schools.
Okay.
So, you know, I'm very kind of I'm very much a novice when it comes to that sort of thing. You know, all I can tell you generally about music is whether I liked it and why I liked it. But, you know, in terms of the historical, you know, in terms of anything historical about it, I can't offer much in that regard.
Yeah. Well, and I'm actually kind of in the opposite boat, where I have the musical knowledge and obviously the musical education, but I don't listen to a lot of hip hop, and I don't listen to a great deal of popular music, just because I don't. But at least with hip hop, my introduction to hip hop actually came when I was still teaching general music, and my first full-time teaching job was at it was in a very urban area, very low income area, and I quickly found out that the most popular music among the students was hip hop, and I kind of came to the conclusion, like, if I was going to be asking these kids to keep an open mind about music that they didn't know or didn't like, and to learn more about it and to learn how to respect it and appreciate it, which is what I wanted to do with my classes, I would have to do the same thing. And so I started learning more about hip hop, which I knew very little about and I never really enjoyed. And there are two things, without getting too deeply into the history, there are two things about hip hop that I think really make it work in this particular musical. The first is that you kind of mentioned it earlier. It stands in contrast to the traditional, like British pop and musical theater that King George sings. Hip hop music was, and the hip hop movement in general, was an act of artistic rebellion in a lot of ways.
Yes.
And this encompasses graffiti art, defacing public property with spray paint, but in an artistic way. This extends into breakdancing. This extends into all sorts of different hip hop elements, for which rap music was the musical and literary arm of it. And so it's an act of rebellion, and it's a way of giving those who felt that they didn't have a voice, primarily poor African Americans, living in Harlem and living in ghetto areas, giving them a voice and giving them a very unique voice that they could use to express themselves. And that crosses over into the American story, the early American story, where you have these rebellious British colonists who want to start their own country, and they're speaking out against the authority of the British Empire. And that's also why, and we haven't mentioned this yet, and it's not immediately obvious when you're just listening to the soundtrack, but that's also why all of the major historical figures in this musical, most of them anyway, are played by people of color. The biggest exception is King George.
Right.
He's the white man. Everyone else pretty much is played by a person of color, and the reason. And the reason for that is Lin-Manuel Miranda describes this musical as the story of America as told by today's America. So he has a very diverse cast, and it helps to really open the door to American history in a way that no other story is really able to do if they were going to tell it more historically accurately, with a more historically accurate cast. And then the other thing with hip-hop is that hip-hop is really more of a genre of words than it is a genre of music. The musical elements are very, very intentionally stripped down in rap music. It's just, take like the music of the 1970s when rap was first starting to become a thing. The music of the 1970s was very, very heavily orchestrated, very heavily produced. There was a lot of stuff going on. And hip-hop music strips all that away. And you have your basic beat, you have your bass line, you have some, chords all repeated on a loop in a very minimalist fashion, so that all the focus then goes to the words. And so what you're hearing is not so much music as it is poetry with a musical backing. And so all the focus goes into the words, and with Alexander Hamilton being a man of words, and being a man who wrote his way out of every situation he's in. He sang a song about it in the musical. He writes his way out of situation that he's in. He uses his words to get what he wants and gets what he needs to survive, basically. And And so when assigning musical genres, it was natural that he would be using hip-hop as his primary musical genre to express himself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You talk about historical accuracy, and that actually reminds me of something. I looked around for some just sort of basic opinions of just what various people think of this, and one of the things that I have been coming across from time to time is this notion that one of the major complaints about Hamilton that I have been hearing is not so much about the thing itself, but more about the fact that Hamilton is there's been this tendency in history for a really long time for the most common term that I've heard is the sort of great men narrative, where the idea that a lot of much of history can be just summed up in the actions of a few great men, and that's really and that's not how history works. Mm-hmm. And the main complaint that I've seen about Hamilton is that it is kind of a great men narrative. Mm-hmm. And that's not something I necessarily agree with so much as this. Again, what I've gotten from the music and from the lyrics is that this is not so much a musical about history as it's in a historical setting, but it's more about a couple of specific people and the ways in which their stories are told. Yeah. Which again is kind of related to Twisted in how how any story is told heavily influences how we view the story itself. Mm-hmm. And I think that is more what this is about than any kind of concern with any sort of accuracy or creating this sort of great men narrative. Lin-Manuel Miranda has said, openly, that obviously there are plenty of liberties taken with the history of this of this musical, and I think that going to Hamilton looking for a history lesson is not a great use of your time. It's not, you shouldn't be trying to learn actual history from this musical, because that's not really what it's trying to be. I think its goal is to be a good story about interesting people and a sort of examination of how these stories are told. And in that regard, it succeeds remarkably well. So I wanted to address that because it's something that I've seen popped up a lot, and I just, in the same way that I've seen a lot of people get upset about the historical inaccuracies in the Pocahontas movies. Mm-hmm. I don't understand why people go to that for historical accuracy, or Hercules with mythological accuracy. Don't. If you want accuracy, go to original myths, go to history books.
Read a textbook, yeah.
Right. It's, I understand that that's a little dry, but, that's kind of, if you want accuracy, you have to sacrifice some narrative satisfaction.
Well, and that's why we have stories about these things to begin with.
Right.
That's really where we have stories for a more compelling and more interesting and more narratively satisfying version of life, whether it be real life, whether it be historical events, mythological, whatever it might be. And I feel like the folks who complain about historical inaccuracies in anything like this, whether it be Hamilton or like 1776 or the movie Amadeus, I've seen complaints about all three of those, and and also the things that you mentioned about historical accuracy. And I feel like the people who make these complaints are envisioning that there are going to be people, students primarily, who are going to go to these and they're going to try to use these as references for history. And they're going to go, oh, well, it was in this movie, so it must be true. But what I've been seeing in Hamilton in particular is that it's, like I said, it's opened the door for American history in a really compelling way. And I think what has been happening is that people are being engaged by the musical, being engaged by the story, and then taking it upon themselves to do their own research into the life of Alexander Hamilton and into the events that he participated in. And so that's where you get a lot of these people saying, well, this happened, but, this happened in the musical, but this happened in real life. But people are taking the time to do that research on their own and to discover those things. And I think without Hamilton there, they never would have done that. Like, Alexander Hamilton, like, he's one of the big names of the Founding Fathers, but he's also, in a lot of ways, one of the more obscure Founding Fathers, because we know that he was instrumental in the founding of our country, because his name is mentioned and his face is on the $10 bill. But outside of that, before Hamilton, people really didn't know that much about him, I don't think. They knew he was the first Treasury Secretary. They knew that he was, shot by Aaron Burr. But outside of that, like, I did not know, for example, that Alexander Hamilton was an immigrant.
No.
Which comes up increasingly in this musical. I didn't know he was an immigrant. I didn't know that he had gone through all this, childhood trauma with his father leaving and his mother dying. I didn't know any of this about him. Like the biggest exposure I had to the history of Alexander Hamilton is I read a book once about the election of 1800, and in that book he's kind of portrayed as a jerk, which in a lot of ways he was, but not as necessarily as sympathetic, because it's told from more from the perspective of John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, neither one of whom got along with Alexander Hamilton that well. And so to have this story exist that finally gives Alexander Hamilton his due as a founding father and tells his story, I think it works incredibly well. And I think the theme of this show being about, kind of the last word in the musical is who tells your story. And that's really a theme that keeps coming back, is how is this story being told? How is this story being conveyed? And that's really, when it comes right down to it, that's really what this musical it seems to be about for me.
Yeah, we as a people use narrative as a way to create interest in subjects that are hard to create interest in. I just ended a sentence with a preposition. It's a terrible thing to end a sentence with. It's my favorite joke in the world.
It's a good one.
Yes. Anyways, I think that that to complain about any kind of historical liberties is to kind of miss the point, and to underappreciate the amount of interest in American history that this musical has helped to drum up. But again, just quite apart from all of that, apart from any kind of historical context or anything like that, this is just a really, really damn good musical. It is lyrically dense, it is complex, it is wonderful, it's beautiful, it's really interesting, it's really compelling. I would like to see this on stage, and it's coming to Chicago, so there's going to be a production opening up in Chicago, so I may be able to see this in Chicago eventually. I imagine it'll have quite a long run here. I'm reasonably certain Wicked is still running in Chicago, so these popular things do have a long life, so I may be able to see a stage production of it eventually. I hope I do, because I thoroughly enjoyed listening to this, and I'm glad that this podcast kind of gave me an excuse to really just sort of sit down and listen to it, because the main thing that that made me not listen to it for a while was because I knew it was very, very dense, to the point that I was going to want to be able to be looking at lyrics, so I wasn't going to be able to kind of listen to it while I was doing something else. I would have to kind of give it my full attention. And because it's about a 3-hour commitment, I was kind of holding off on that for a while. But I'm really, really glad that I finally got into this, because it is truly, truly fantastic.
And when you start digging into some of the extra musical things too, and this is my geekiness coming out. When you start digging into like some of the use of themes and the way that he uses, he reuses musical themes, and like especially like musical themes in Act 1 come back in Act 2. The way that he uses little leitmotifs and all that sort of thing is really, really musically tight. Like it's lyrically dense, but in a way it's also very musically dense. Because it is just, like I said, every genre choice is intentional, every musical choice is intentional. Like, it's obvious that a lot of thought and passion and work was put into this musical, and it really, really shows.
Yeah. Like I remember I was reading a lot of that kind of stuff on the Genius.com sidebar, and I was just kind of looking at it and like, well, I don't really know what most of this means, but I bet Matt will tell me why it's cool.
Yeah, like I told you before we started recording, I think I could talk about Hamilton for probably several hours, just going piece by piece and pointing out all the little things. But I won't do that, because then we'll be here for another couple of hours. So we'll just say, I think we'll go ahead and just say for now that Hamilton is a wonderful musical. If you for some reason have not listened to the cast recording, it is entirely available on YouTube. There are even some channels that put it in playlist form. You can listen to it on YouTube. You can also purchase it if you feel so inclined. It is helpful to, like Jesse did, go to Genius.com and read along with the lyrics and kind of get a sense of what else is happening and what other things are going on in this musical, to really kind of get the fullest experience that you can get without actually going to see the musical. And if you do have the opportunity to go and see the musical, you should feel very fortunate, because neither Jesse nor I have had that opportunity yet, though hopefully we will soon. Yes. But if you do have that opportunity to see it for a relatively little amount of money, then by all means do, and please let us know what you thought of it.
Yeah. And it should be said that I've been kind of making a big thing of how I wanted to be able to sit down and look at the lyrics and all that kind of thing. That's not necessary. Like, I don't want to, like, scare people away from that. You know, like, I would have been perfectly happy just listening to this on my own time. Like now having listened to it, I can realize, like, in hindsight, okay, yeah, I could have just listened to this on my own time, and I wouldn't have really missed a whole lot. But I wanted to have that kind of experience just because I knew I was going to be sort of talking about it in a little bit more depth when Matt and I came to it. So but the way that I did it, where I was sitting and analyzing lyrics and reading stuff and looking at all the sidebar stuff, none of that is necessary to enjoy or appreciate the music. It's just an really bonus. Really good. Yeah, I like to, when I'm experiencing something, I try to experience it as deeply as I possibly can. Even though I actually it's actually very fresh in my mind, because I actually just finished listening to the last few songs last night as we're recording this, so it's all very fresh in my mind. And it's it's really, really good. So experience it any way that you can, if you have the chance, because it's really, really worth your time. So that is about it for this month. Thank you guys so much for listening.
Our theme music is Mistake the Getaway by Kevin MacLeod, who you can find at Incompetech.com, a fantastic database for royalty-free music tracks. No, we're not sponsored by him, we're just paying it forward.
Yeah, we release these on the third Friday of every month. If you are so inclined, share this podcast with your friends, and feel free to come back next month for more musings of questionable import. And please, have a wonderful day.
Bye.